Hi, welcome to the Funding Blueprint, Unlocking Startup Success, presented by StartHub. I'm Cody Goff, and today you're going to learn about how to develop a smart product strategy, as well as what VCs want right now. This year, what do VCs want to invest in? My guest will spell it out very clearly, and her name is Emily Bennett, principal at Owl Ventures. Owl Ventures is the largest venture capital firm in the world focused on the EdTech market, with over $2 billion in assets under management. Emily has an incredible background in product strategy for technology and media companies, including Facebook, the New York Times, and Spotify. At Facebook, she served as product marketing manager for news integrity, and she implemented products and initiatives to help curb misinformation and better incentivize high-quality news across the platform. At the New York Times, she was product manager for video, where she drove product strategy for immersive streaming experiences. And at Spotify, she worked on growth product strategy for their artist-facing platform. In our conversation, Emily shared some incredible insights about the inner workings of the largest EdTech VC in the world. But with all that experience she has in product strategy, I thought you might want to hear a little bit about what makes product strategy so important and how to make a good one. So let's start there. Here's our conversation.
You asked the difference between a product strategy and a startup's general strategy. I think a product strategy is a subcomponent of a larger strategy. And as a startup, you're thinking about a myriad of things. You're thinking about what's the problem we're trying to solve? How do we actually solve that and build something that interfaces with that product? How do we think about functions of scale? So that's go-to-market, a business model that will actually work at scale. How does this unit economic model actually work? And how do we build a team around this to kind of really function and scale that vision out? A pillar of this is product. So often for early stage companies, the first thing you should really be thinking about when you're thinking about building a business is backing up and kind of asking yourself, is my concept solving a real problem? Is it a sizable problem with enough sufficient scale to really make it interesting and meaty? Is it a problem that's underserved? I think we sometimes will get pitched segments in which there are a range of competitors all building in a similar way. And I think you do really need to be building something that's differentiated and distinctive to make it compelling and to make it something that is serving evergreen space. Once you've solved that problem, then product comes in, because you kind of validate that there's a problem, you understand who you're trying to serve. But it's what do we build to actually serve that problem? And so product strategy falls into that ilk of here's the problem, how do we actually fix it and service it through actual product implementation? The business strategy surrounds that. It's once you have a product, great products can kind of die on the vein of not having an audience. And so it's how do you actually acquire an audience for that product? And how do you think about a real monetization pathway around it that eventually builds a revenue model that can enable you to scale, that can enable you to really prove competency and eventually raise additional fundraising round or move towards a path of self-sufficiency.
Yeah, I got to ask about the, if the problem being solved by multiple companies, are there some problems that are so big that there is space for multiple companies to step in?
For sure. I think there are definitely spaces that are so sizable that there's room for multiple players to come in. The one caveat I'd have is that players need to have at least distinctive positioning, a reason to exist side by side. And you can even see the model of like Uber versus Lyft, both playing in the same market. I think there's enough need for ride shares, enough need for better time efficiency, and access to cars and utility that they can both exist in the same market. But there is a need to kind of distinguish and brand differently in a service of both acquiring drivers and acquiring buyers. Lyft initially leaned more into this kind of friendly rhetoric, something that was kind of anti-corporate, while Uber leaned into predictability. And so there was these kind of subtle nuances that enabled them both to exist side by side and scale in parallel versus having one be a commodity play. So yes, I definitely think there's room for multiple players, but there does need to be kind of distinctive niches or perspectives that they serve side by side.
Got it. Now, when developing a product strategy for for really advanced organizations like the ones that you've been associated with, are there like higher level questions than what problem are we solving and how are we making ourselves unique? Or are you just digging deeper into those questions?
I think you have to continually dig deeper into those questions. Because even I'll take Spotify as an example, every new product that you're launching, there's a added level of risk in some form, of like a risk of disruption. You have a platform in which every experience is precious, in which the audience is precious and pressure tested. And so you don't want to do something that's vehemently disruptive or has a fear of kind of cannibalization of what you already built and proven out. But additionally, you want to make sure that it's a real expansion of value. And each value layer should be observed in combination, but also observed individually. So I do think it does always go back to the same problem of kind of, same question, is this a real problem? Does this serve our existing audience, or is it an expansion of audience? And why is this important to build? And if you think that all of those answers are correct, and you kind of tested that out and spoken to the end audience and actually validated that it is something potentially worth investing time and resources to actualize through product work.
Yeah, it's interesting to me, the Spotify example, just because I'm like a podcast guy, podcast consultant, podcast like expert, and Spotify put all this money into podcasting, and they have a tremendous market share now. They're outranking Apple in some places for consumption. Coming from zero. And there's some people in the industry that kind of naysay it a little bit, like, well, they put in all this money, but what have they gotten? And it's like, well, like 50% market share in some places seems pretty good to me, right?
For sure. That's the beauty of already owning audiences, and owning audiences that are quite parallel to the podcast audience. When I was there, Spotify was talking a lot about how to expand its perceived utility away from just music and towards sound, this ecosystem of sound. And so underlying audio, there is music as a subcomponent, but it's also spoken word, it's also podcasting, it's also stories. And so it was a really natural extension point. And that goes back to how to think about brand and extensibility. But they had a leg up. They had relationship with an ecosystem of content providers. Most of that was music specific, but it made it an easier conversation, an easier door in. They had teams that had kind of dealt deeply with licensing on the audio side, at the music side, that they could then use those learnings and think about more of the nuance on the podcast side. And they had a really scaled audience. And what does podcasting need? Whereas it struggled before is like really finding captive listeners and making that model work. You'll see in the way that they actually built podcasting, it's an easy entry point from their existing app, and that's very intentional, whereas Apple actually segmented out into its own specified space. With Spotify, it's something that's fluid and seamless because it really builds on their existing user base as an expansion of value versus something that's a separate value proposition.
Yeah. In terms of the different elements that make a strong product strategy, is there one that you see commonly overlooked when startups come to you to try to work with your organization?
For sure. A real understanding of the user that they are trying to serve. I think that I get pitched products a lot that are trying to do everything for everyone. Those products often fail. Those kind of generalized, broad utility platforms. People are looking for like very specific intention when they interact with apps and products. They open it looking for this. And so you really need to understand both who are those people that you're trying to serve and what are they looking for, and build for both. If you launch something where you don't really know who's going to be the person that's seeking your app and the specific utility that they are coming to expect, then you're going to build something that really doesn't have value for anyone.
Can you recall any specific moments, and you don't have to name names if you don't want to, but where a startup walked in and wanted to work with you and either just blew you away, and what made that so excellent, or something that just makes them just dead in the water right away, where you say, I hear this one more time and I'm just done with you.
Yeah. I think there's a lot of parallels right now in the AI space, where there's a level of almost fatigue coupled with excitement that is settling over investors, and just hearing a myriad of lookalike AI pitches. And it's natural. This happens. We saw this in like the crypto boom. This happens any time that a sector gets hot. And to be very clear, I think AI is different than crypto. I think this is the future. I think there's massive facets of scale and innovation that will stem from this. But I think we're still pretty nascent on understanding where real value and utility lies within the actual implementation of AI. I'm getting pitched right now just a lot of companies in AI that are building on the exact same tech stack, building the exact same way, and that really haven't thought about their distinctive reason to win. And that's challenging because in early stage investing, you're needing to take a bet on the upside of if you're getting pitched a similar concept in a room, what's the one that's going to win? And if you can't discern that, it makes it really hard to navigate. So right now, that I think that's a fail point in some pitches, is not being able to clearly articulate what is our reason to win? Why us? Why us versus the other 50 companies that have pitched you in this space? And if you can answer that, that's when it gets exciting. There's a couple of examples of that latter point that we have actively invested in. Sizzle AI is a company that I work with quite closely. What excited us there, both founder profile and the component of what they're building towards, larger vision. Founder profile, he was the former head of AI at Meta, named Jerome. It's been fantastic to work with. And what you get there is just real competency in building in this space and ability to hire a team and to really understand how to train on top of existing models in a distinctive way, and ideally at a faster pace than others in the market. So that goes back to why us? Why are we able to build better relative to others in the space? Additionally, he pitched a really large vision where kind of there's current product and there's what are you building towards. And I think sometimes a breakpoint of founders in their initial pitches, they focus very myopically on what are we building right now versus what are we building towards. And in venture, you're betting on the towards. You're betting on that larger vision. He very much pitched the towards, which is effectively wants to create, you think about Duolingo for languages, creating a more category agnostic version of that's powered by AI, but really like a consumer learning agent that can scale longitudinally and really lead to better outcomes. That's something that we can get behind. And that's just not another wraparound tool around GPT. That's something that starts small, but gets much bigger and addresses a larger TAM and problem set.
The golden nugget that I really heard there was ventures invest on the vision, that more long-term. How long-term, how grand are we talking? And what's a good balance between the short-term, what we have, and that long-term?
Yeah, it's hard. It's a hard balance to strike. There's also sometimes you can't underwrite long-term vision too much. Because oftentimes you're betting on an upside that might not exist. Founders pivot frequently, things don't map out, and that's just the nature of building a company, is being wrong and iterating and realizing a different future based on the learnings from the market. I think it is really a balancing act, and what you can't do is come in and only pitch vision and not have anything to show for yourself. You need to really have proven that what you've built right now has validation, and validation can mean different things. In the construct of, I mentioned Sizzle, Maximal is another company we work with that's focused on this conversational AI agent for the executive functioning space. Validation there could be team. It could be like, these are the smartest of the smart people who have all of the right to be able to build better in this space. That's a layer of validation that will resonate with investors. Validation in the absence or even in combination of that can mean other things. It can mean, yes, we've built a product. This product is pressure tested. And I, as a product person, I go in and I actually use, if I'm the end user, the ideal end user for this product, I always use the product. I always ask myself, is this something that I'll engage with? Is this something that I would retain to? And if the answer is no, it's probably a negative signal at an early stage. And if I'm not the end user, I'll go and talk to people that would be the end user and actually validate that this is something that has command with them and that is well received. And that validation can be numerical. And as you continue to scale and move the rounds, it becomes increasingly quantitative. But the art in the early stages is having those other forms of validation to really get someone excited. And then you back into vision. It's got to be proven out that at an early stage, there's a reason to be excited about what you've already built and you've already proven out. But it's not just that. And that's the nugget of acceleration and growth. There's no set time trajectory for how to think about long-term. Often, and this is variable, but when we're talking about projections and forecasts, anything beyond 5 years starts to feel pretty loose. But it's not really, we're not talking in time horizon necessarily. Every call that I ask, I'm asking, like, what are you building towards? What are you trying to become? And that's not time boxed. It's more like when you grow up, If this company is everything that you expect it to be, what do you want it to be? Are you Google? Are you something that is fundamentally different? Like what's your long-term vision? And how they actually articulate that shows how they're thinking about the space and how large that vision is and what you are betting on in venture. This isn't true for every segment. Sometimes there's niche models that really scale, but for venture, you're betting on big ideas. And so you're trying to narrow in on, is this a big idea that we can underwrite based on their current proven value?
Is there a need to, I'm thinking specifically AI, is there a need to understand how the product works? And I ask that because like a lot of AI researchers don't know how AI does what it does. So when investing in an AI kind of thing, how does that play out?
You need to understand enough. You're never going to be the expert. And that's true often as an investor. Like I'd say there's some parts of EdTech where I feel like I am now increasingly an expert. Definitely consumer social. I still feel like I'm an expert in some components of the space, but many companies that I talk to, I am not an expert, and I never will be. But I can learn and I can talk to experts. So part of the art of evaluation is understanding who are the people that know the most about these segments, and how can we actually connect with those people to validate our questions and our key asks. For AI specifically, if it was something where I was really relying on the model as the form of kind of distinctive differentiation, I would go to someone that really understood models, that understood and could talk to me and kind of answer my key questions around that model. And I don't need to know everything. I don't need to know the full depth around model creation, but I do know if my question is around defensibility and what makes this different, I need to be able to answer that question. And so that's what it stems down to. You don't need to know everything about everything, but you do need to know, typically for businesses, there's a couple of key questions that are like strong predictors of, is this interesting or is that not? And I need to become a specialist about those key questions.
When talking about AI, you said you're getting a lot of AI pitches. Are there any types of pitches or areas of education, any segments that you wish you would see more of?
Yeah, I like that question because I'm seeing a lot, but yes, I think right now, where have I really been seeing AI? There's probably like 3 primary use cases. One has been in tutoring. Personalization of learning. I think that's a massive opportunity. But I'm not sure that we fully know what form that will take yet. I'm not sure if it's like a full avatar delivering the tutoring or if it's an augmentation of teacher instruction with more personalized delivery. But I definitely think that is room for innovation and also room for real impact in increasing access of personalization of tutoring and really like breaking down the model of one-to-many towards one-to-one, which to me is the future of education. It's everyone, you enter a classroom and everything that you get is entirely directed towards you, how you learn, where you are in your progress. And to me, AI is that structure in a digital format. Where I wish people were spending more time, sometimes people shy away from like the most boring things that really drive the most value. And that isn't necessarily like the cool UX on top of GPT and new chat interfaces for schools, but it could be like, think about all of the inefficiencies that inhibit a school from operating, inhibit a school from really delivering learning at scale, and solve for that. Make it easier for people to do their jobs, make it easier for kids to learn, like down to like the simple rote things that make learning function. And I don't have like a perfect answer for what those systems could be, but like thinking about integration of data layers, thinking about administrative tasks in a school context, thinking about, again, that like catering of directive instruction and what that could actually look like in a form that, if it's in a K-12 context, is likely hybrid. And if it's outside, likely exists in a virtual first format, but is built on the same ethos of like better cater personalized delivery of instruction. So yeah, the boring things, that's where I love people to build as long as they actually deliver value.
What's the number one thing you've learned from the VC world that you wish more startup founders would know before they walk into a meeting with you?
The importance of having a good pitch. I think the reality is that some founders will kind of come into conversations with VCs, and you should always start out like conversational. It's about building a relationship, but it's also always about like putting your best foot forward. And so like really being ready to like talk about why what you're building is worth something, and advocate for the future that you're building towards. some of that like bigger picture thinking and really being able to articulate and communicate that. The second is I think in the past, and this has been kind of the nature of a resettling market, there's just been a lot of confusion around what venture capitalists are looking for in this time period. Is it growth? Is it profitability? What should the composition of growth look like? I think the reality is that we're also resetting our expectations. But when it comes down to it, what VCs are looking for are like really good people building really good businesses. And so going back to those fundamentals, not like over harping on like, how do I talk about cash flow profitability? How do I just really good people building really good businesses with really good ideas? And if you can communicate that and articulate like the metrics underlying that, that's probably something that's going to resonate with anyone, VC and beyond. I think the reality is that for like a venture format, growth always matters. And I do think some of the messaging around like, index around profitability has been important as a form of like company self-sufficiency in a period where it's been harder to gain capital. But at the end of the day, for any venture viewer, what they are going to be looking for is like, do you have a venture-style growth trajectory? And so I think the advice to founders would be, yes, think about self-sufficiency as a lever for you. It's a way to continue to build, a way to not be reliant and to enable the market to resettle. But for VC to prove out to them what warrants a downstream fundraise, it's about, yes, use of cash, but it's also about proving that you can scale. And that is a critical unlock for any company, is like, look at our ability to get here and to get here efficiently. Having a company that spent $100 million to get there and it's now at $5 million ARR, that's not that impressive. But if you can say, look, we operated really efficiently and we scaled, like that's the calculus that's really going to unlock conversations.
And is it possible to walk in and do that when the person, founding it really isn't proven? Head of AI at Meta, sure, he's in charge of Sizzle AI. Of course, that's impressive. And you've mentioned a couple times, though, having the right team, having the right people. What about the dream of the child of the immigrant family that works part-time at a job somewhere during school, then wants to launch something when he's 22 and just has these big dreams? Can that happen?
It has to happen. Otherwise, we're just we're filtering for the same lens and filter bubble that exist in other spaces. I think that leads to like a dramatic amount of lack of access and systemic bias in how we actually think about new opportunities. And I think it leads to a hindrance in innovation. What I always say is like, I think the staple of a really good investor isn't the person that finds that second time founder and gives them more money. Like that person's already proven out. The staple of a really good investor is the person that walks into a room and meets someone who no one else has found, someone who is really new in understanding how to deliver his pitch, and they understand by instinct that person is interesting. And so I think as like investors in the space, we always have to be doing the work to prove out that latter point. Always listen in pitches, accept conversations, and really ask yourself the critical question again of, is this an interesting person? Interesting person doesn't just mean background. It means smarts. It means articulation. It means like a real concept of what they want to build and the pathway for execution to get there. And are they building something that should exist? And if they are building something that should exist, even if they're not the former CEO of a unicorn company, maybe they will be the next, and that's what you're betting on. Okay.
Remember that, listener. Build something that should exist. And I don't mean that tongue-in-cheek. That's really good advice. Now, Owl Ventures works with companies across the education spectrum, right? Pre-K through 12, higher education, future of work, EdTech plus. It sounds like you're passionate about a lot of some of the pre-K through 12 work, and we could use some more innovation there. Do you ever recommend to people that they focus on a certain area, or are there more opportunities in particular areas?
I think there's opportunities on all segments. There's also challenges in all segments. We've seen that clearly over the past couple of years. In K-12, you get stickier contracts, but it's also a harder sales process. It takes time to actually sell and really crack the code on K-12. Direct to consumer over the past year, I think CAC was an issue, which led to just economic attrition for a lot of founders. But it's also a space where if you crack the virality code, It's really easy to scale users and to get early validation. So there's kind of trade-offs of every segment. What I'd always ask a founder is like, what are you passionate about? And then think about what you're trying to build and where will it really resonate? What's the segment and channel that makes the most sense for it, and actually getting it out to its audience. And sometimes that can be multiple things. Like we've seen a lot of examples of companies that are building both for direct to consumer and then segue into K-12. So it's this more kind of hybrid channel concept. But like really just being clear again on like who are you serving and how do you reach them most effectively for you. I don't think there's a single channel of choice. And I think in reality, like that ends up being too narrow of a vision around EdTech. EdTech should be holistic. It should exist in the school. It should exist beyond. And we're very much in the mind of investing in companies in all forms that are delivering learning in really scalable and interesting ways.
I know we're pretty much up on time, but I wanted to ask, are there any particular problems or solutions you've learned about since starting to work as an EdTech investor that really surprised you that you don't think a lot of people know about?
I think a lot of the learning for me has also been international and the innovation that's happening overseas. OWL as a firm, we were focusing, I'd say, increasingly internationally. We now have an office in London, have a team in New York and San Francisco as well. The portfolio company is really all over the world. And what I'm starting to learn about is just like how the extensibility of concepts, the models that we've really seen work in the US that we're starting to see really take off abroad in this construct of just like unique access and opportunity that's seeded in other markets. Examples of that include we're investors in Hazel Health, which is this mental health, physical health platform for K-12 in the US. We recently invested in an early stage company out of Brazil called Koala that's building in the same ilk, effectively trying to be the Hazel Health for that region. We have ULesson in Africa, which is trying to create a new model around EdTech proliferation and e-learning for a space where really there aren't many skilled alternatives. And so that was a surprise for me, like thinking about the unlocks of these new markets, the unique challenges that sit there, but also like the real scalable opportunity to create a new model of learning in sectors that are more nascent and geos that are more nascent.
Are we also borrowing ideas from countries that are doing education better than the US?
Yes, I think that we should. We should always be looking to learn. That sounds hilarious in the lens of EdTech, but also as investors and as entrepreneurs and builders, we should also be looking to learn. And as school administrators. So I think individual country lines often have like the tendency to just look inwards and think myopically and to assume that they are the best. The probability is that there's learnings to accrue from everywhere. There's learnings to accrue from you and there's learnings to accrue from other people. So I think we should always be looking inwards and outwards simultaneously. Otherwise, you're missing the mark.
Brilliant. Great advice. And people can learn more about OWL Ventures at owlvc.com. If you've got a great EdTech idea, hit them up. Maybe you'll end up talking to Emily. Who knows? And Emily, do you like for people to like follow you on social anywhere?
You can. I am not a prolific poster on Twitter, so you're going to be bored. But I'd say follow me connect with me on LinkedIn. Also shoot me an email at emily@owlvc.com. Always happy to connect with people individually. That's
great. But you said you were an expert in social media, so you just kind of know it from the outside.
Not a poster. Those things are two categories. Consumer media.
Excellent. Thank you so much for joining me, Emily. I know you're very busy. Really appreciate it. This was a fantastic conversation.
Of course. Great to meet you.
Thanks for listening to The Funding Blueprint, Unlocking Startup Success, or watching. Yes, this podcast is available in video form for free on YouTube and Spotify, so check us out there if you like to have visuals with your podcast. The Funding Blueprint is produced by me, Cody Goff, with audio editing by Sean Patel. If you're looking for awesome sound design or audio video production work, then get in touch with Sean at seanpatel.com. And if you're looking for a content strategist who specializes in B2B podcasting, then get in touch with me at Cody@academicpodcasts.com. Thanks again for joining me, and I'll see you next week.